Okay, we're recording now. And welcome back to I think this is video number 8 in our series of videos about problems facing American democracy. And today we talk about the United States. Last time we talked about a um, uh, very bad proposed law in England, which, if passed, and it will pass, will in fact criminalize protest. So we took a side trip to Great Britain a couple of weeks ago. But now we're back in the United States, and a lot of things have happened in 2 weeks. And we were going to talk more about Joe Biden's infrastructure reform bill. But then a few days ago, something quite shocking, both Anders and I thought, took place. So we're going to talk about that. And that was the defeat of workers at an Amazon warehouse in Alabama. There had been a long drive to create a union there, and it was actually, it didn't take place. They lost the vote. So we're going to talk about that today, Amazon and the importance it has on the American labor market, why it's important to have unions, and what happened at the Amazon plant or Amazon warehouse, and why the union vote didn't pass, and what can be some of the repercussions of this. So without further ado, I will ask Anders to tell us something about this, what happened over I guess it was the weekend, and yeah, what was the vote and why was it important, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the results came in on Friday, and
Oh,
basically it's a vote in a huge Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, uh, about whether to unionize the workplace or not, and the employees lost and Amazon won. Uh, which is it's both, as you said, shocking and also, like I told you before, severely depressing. It's
oh,
uh, it's a big setback, and the reason and the reason why we're discussing it here, part of the reason at least, is this is very much a question of democracy. I think
right.
unions are basically the only democratic input employees have concerning their work environments. And considering we spend like a good portion of our lives
Oh,
at work, it's uh, uh, it's a fairly big and important thing for people's democratic engagement
right.
with their like general living conditions and stuff.
Mm,
Uh, so it's a big deal because this like it's just one warehouse, but symbolically it's an important vote, and was an important vote,
mm,
especially considering the company in question, Amazon, which is extremely anti-union and
mm,
quite bad when it comes to that sort of stuff.
right.
Um, they just opened a warehouse here in Sweden, and
Uh-huh.
before that place opened, people were quite worried. Are they gonna like abide by the laws here in Sweden concerning
Okay.
reunions and stuff
Where
like that?
was this?
Eskilstuna.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Sorry, I missed it,
it's
even though I live here.
it's
What?
no, it's I
Has
mean,
it
here in
opened?
Sweden, it's excuse me.
Has it opened, or I mean,
Yeah, it's opened
uh-huh.
like a couple of months ago.
Okay.
Here in Sweden, it's much harder to get around the rules because there's more of a consensus concerning the role of unions and
Right.
like the kind of anti-union tactics Amazon engages in the US are just like highly illegal here in Sweden, most of them. uh, and they don't have the same political and economic clout here in Sweden as they do in the US.
No.
It's
Mm.
not as big an issue here, but at the same time, it's worrying. It's worrying trend, and like someone needs to step up to Amazon and try to reform
Mm.
their practices in
Right.
relation to their workers
Right.
and organized labor. Otherwise, things will probably in the long term get worse here in Sweden as well.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Maybe I should say something about uh, bad bad tactics used by Amazon.
Yeah, no, I
They,
was going to say, because I think it's difficult for people, even for, well, not so much for myself, because I grew up in America and I started working in America. But how different it is, uh, the United States and Sweden. The unions are accepted here. Yes, membership has gone down and can come back to this later. It's an international phenomena, which I think is very worrying, again, from a democracy point of view, that everywhere except for Iceland, where I plan to move, has 90% unionization. Um, and but yeah, it's a question of democracy, because this is the only way that workers, and we're all workers one way or another, have a chance to influence their, not only their wages, but especially working conditions, and especially when
yes.
it comes to Amazon, that's very important. But in Sweden, yeah, if you want to start a union, I mean, I don't think you'll be fired, or you'll get nasty letters in the mail, or you won't be forced to stay after at work and listen to propaganda. I mean, it's just a totally different, it's such a strong anti-union presence in the United States. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. That when it's not a level playing field. It isn't like the union goes in and say, "We're going to have a vote," and Amazon says, "Okay, we'll vote for and against and all that." But it is such an uphill struggle, and then the whole anti-union thing in America, which condones practices, as you can tell us more about, that would not take place uh, in Sweden, and certainly not in Iceland. But yeah, so what are some of the things that Amazon likes to do, or what do they do in this case?
Some of the things are like, maybe I should start by saying that if you want to organize a union in the US, it takes like a lot of courage because most places in the US have at will employment, which basically means that your employer can fire you at any time for
Right.
any reason at all or no reason at all.
Oh,
Uh, and if you start talking openly about forming a union, then you're probably not gonna be long at that place.
oh,
Your boss is gonna fire you, so you have to do it clandestinely,
mm,
uh, almost like a weird spy game, like sneaking
oh,
around and talking to fellow employees, hope nobody snitches on you to the
oh,
boss and stuff like that. And one of the things Amazon does is they hire basically private police, like the infamous
I
Pinkerton
was going to say
agency.
the Pinkertons from the 19th century that they used to
Yeah,
catch
well,
breakers. Are they
the,
still Pinkertons, or
oh yeah, yeah, they still hire
really?
the Pinkertons among
Okay.
others to spy on employees inside and outside of work. And especially if they suspect that there might be a union drive happening, they try to like root out the problem by finding the agitators or whatever you
Oh,
want to call them, and just fire them, get rid of them before the process reaches a certain level, because uh, you really only have legal protection if you're trying to form a union once you reach a certain point. Once
right,
you go public
right,
and demand a vote,
right.
then it's like highly illegal to fire
Yeah,
you.
right.
And what they're trying to do is one, intimidate people and to try to figure out who's leading the effort to form a union, and just get rid of them before things go too far, so to speak. And then there's also, because if you don't have a union at a workplace, the power of the employer is basically like complete, total,
Right.
in a workplace, which means they can force you during work hours to sit through information meetings, which is basically like hours and hours of mandatory anti-union propaganda.
Right.
You know, just scare propaganda about how bad unions are, and what's going to happen if you start a union. Everyone's going to get fired, and the factory is going to move, and this and that and the other thing. And like as an employee, you basically have no recourse.
No. No, you don't have any rights. It was interesting about Pinkertons because, as we were talking earlier, so the United States has a very long history of labor movement violence. The military has been sent in. I mean, hundreds, thousands of people were killed in labor disputes. If you look at the entire history from the 19th century to the present, well, present things, maybe people aren't killed. I mean, this was certainly true up until the 1930s, really. So the military was brought out to shoot at striking miners and striking railway workers. The local police, like in Chicago, they joined in, and the and the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which is actually founded. They were the ones who it was Pinkerton who was one of the people who prevented Lincoln from being assassinated. Actually, he started off by protecting Abraham Lincoln, who was a pretty good guy, but then they developed into this. Nationwide police, private detective agency, but they're actually involved in spying on employers, on employees. And yeah, the thing also about the education meetings. That's one of the things that happened at this Bessemer plant. Um, I mean, you would work your 10-hour shift, and then you would have to stay on for information about how bad the unions were.
Oh, so it's outside of
Oh
work
yeah, it
hours.
was outside of work. Yeah, yeah, definitely you wouldn't. Another important thing to remember for people outside America, well, also because Amazon is here, is Amazon. I didn't know this, but it is the second largest employer in the United States after Walmart. I knew all, but I mean, again, the enormous change in the American economy. I mean, before it was, General Motors and United Steel and Bethlehem Steel and, the whole manufacturing economy. But now it's all a retail and service industry. And these are the jobs that people have now instead of starting to work in a steel factory or a car factory where, in fact, the few jobs that are left there are actually well paid. Um, so that's another reason why it's so important. But Amazon has this enormous power over workers nationally and then locally as well. And they will do anything to stop unions organizing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have other examples?
Yeah,
They do.
like they'll literally do anything. Like one of the more bizarre things they did in Bessemer was they shortened the time interval
Yes.
for stoplights outside of
Yes.
the warehouse.
Right.
So the light was red for a shorter amount of time, which made it harder for union
Right.
organizers
To
to
get there.
speak to employees
Yeah.
heading into the warehouse, which is like, I mean, it's kind of genius, like,
Evil
given
genius.
that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
I read about that. I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
it's so petty and just like I said, it's bizarre,
Yeah.
and the fact that they managed to make local like authorities go along
That's
with this
exactly.
and actually change the timing
Yeah.
streetlights. that's kind of indicative of the amount of political and economic power they have.
Exactly. Did you hear about the mailbox?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, they put a
uh,
mailbox outside of the
yeah,
factory. I keep saying factory because it is a factory. It's what a factory used to be. It's a warehouse, but you have, uh, yeah, what's it, 2,000 people working there or something like that. I forget,
something like
but
that.
all of these places are really enormous. So it is
I
a
think it's
big
more.
factory.
It's like 6,000 or
Oh,
something.
6,000. You're right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So that is a very large place. Yeah, they put a special mailbox there so people could put their ballots there without going to the post office, wherever that is. Sort of like like changing, on polling day, on voting day. You shut down places where you can vote, but here they will
Yeah,
make it easier for their employees to vote the right way, preferably.
yeah. Well,
But again, you can get local
the,
government to do this in the post office. I'm sorry, that's actually a federal. I
the
mean, you
problem is
can't do that.
the problem is also they put the ballot box, the mailbox for ballots, like in the middle of the warehouse.
Oh,
So if you wanted
so that was it.
to put your ballot in it, like half the warehouse is going to see you walk up to the ballot
So
box,
that's what
which
it
is
was.
like
Oh,
nobody's going to see your ballot whether you're voting yes or no.
but
But I mean, it's a psychological game, which
mm,
definitely makes it harder for
oh
some
yeah,
people, I think, to walk up there in plain view of everyone and put a yes ballot in the box. Uh,
exactly. And there's
uh,
cameras everywhere as well, I imagine.
yeah,
Doesn't
exactly.
Amazon have that sort of surveillance of their, because they can monitor everything that you do. They know exactly how long it takes you to walk from point A to point B and things like that.
Yeah,
So you're under surveillance as well. That's another difference from if you go back to like the old days of manufacturing. I mean, you didn't have. I mean, the technology wasn't there. Maybe there are other ways of spying on employees, but also they're doing pretty heavy work, so it was pretty important. But now you can monitor, and Amazon does do that. Monitor people, as much as possible. Henry
yeah,
Ford had that with the whatchamacallit technique where you time measurement. What's it, the Taylor? Oh, there's time measurement. You could measure. They had people who come into the factories and measure exactly how many seconds it took you to lift your arm and then put something onto the Model A Ford or something. They had it down to a fine science, and they organized labor on the assembly line that way. So Amazon's taken the same principle, but they've taken it to an enormous degree. Is then it was just what you did with your hand, but this is moving throughout the factory
yeah.
and keeping under constant surveillance. And if you don't keep up with the time allotted to you, then again you're going to lose your job.
Yeah, it's coming out of your bathroom break,
Yeah,
literally. Like this is like one of the recent controversies about Amazon.
yeah,
People don't even have time to go to the bathroom
mm,
during their like 10-hour shifts, which means
mm,
they have to like urinate in bottles and stuff
yeah,
while on the road. And like Amazon has tried to defend this publicly on Twitter, which has backfired quite quite wonderfully. But I
yeah,
mean, how can anyone be okay with this? Like
exactly.
it's completely unreasonable. It's
Mm,
not sane in any way. It's not like nobody should be forced to work under those conditions. And like the only way to make sure
yeah,
that people have decent working conditions is organizing in a union and making demands of your employer.
right.
That's the only way. Otherwise, you're left to the mercy of lawmakers. But uh, no, like federal lawmaker in Washington D.C. is going to understand the day-to-day
No,
problems of like a warehouse worker in Alabama.
no,
Only
and it's
people
so
actually on
different
site,
places. No, exactly.
yeah,
And you're not going to have
people on
federal
site know
laws
the
that
issues.
exactly that apply to every circumstance. So again, this is why unions are important. uh,
Yeah,
and a democratic priority. So again, it's not just about the money. It's about, although money obviously is important, but it's especially in the United States, it's about working conditions. And
yeah,
again, there
and
again, it's something in Sweden. I mean, things are regulated, not least because you've had a strong trade union movement. So employers can't get away with that sort of stuff, even though they might try, like in restaurants and so forth. But pretty soon you're gonna be found out. But in America, that is the norm, and you're totally at the mercy of the local warehouse and the the people who own the business. So another
yeah,
thing I
it's
thought I'd mention. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
no, I was gonna say it's basically like small private fiefdoms, like
Mm.
private dictatorships almost,
Yeah,
where
exactly.
your boss has total control over your life
Hmm.
in inside of work hours, and often quite a lot of control over your life outside of work
Hmm.
hours as well. And the only way to challenge this and bring some kind of democracy to the
Right.
workplace, some kind of
Mm.
influence for
Yeah.
the people actually working there, that's unionization.
Yeah.
So there's no, there's like little wonder employers are trying to counter unionization efforts.
Especially, yeah, especially like Amazon. I forget how many billions he has in its own personal wealth and all the rest of it. But I mean, there's money to be had there. But they're used to. It's very much like the end of the 19th century in America, the Gilded Age. When you had the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and people like that, and they were the big employers. They owned everything, railroads and oil and then everything else, and they could do whatever they liked. And they actively, of course, resisted unions. And this is where you have union violence and people being shot and beaten up and everything else. But you have the same thing taking place today, even though you don't have the actual, the physical attacks, although they might occur as well. But it's a same situation where you have very powerful owners of industry or the economic system who will do anything to resist any sort of infringement on their power.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Because it's
age.
like you said, it's not just about the money.
No.
Like the money is part of it, but ultimately it's about control and
Mhm.
uh,
Exactly.
who who has power in
Exactly.
the workplace. But yeah, and also like you said, it's quite similar to the Gilded Age,
Mm.
and like there was a period of time from FDR's administration, first administration,
Mm.
until Reagan, where
Mm.
unions were quite strong in
Yeah.
America. And, unfortunately, Reagan came along. And do you want to say something about that,
Yeah, I
maybe?
thought it used to teach this. I actually had to make a special educational thing for my students because there was nothing in the books we were using about labor history. And since my grandfather was a union man, and I've sort of come from that tradition, so I wrote something. It's very interesting labor history. One little thing is important. May Day, the first May Day demonstrations were held not in the Soviet Union, but in the United States, in Chicago. Now we have Labor Day, an interesting story behind that. So he had two workers' holidays. Was just that Grover Cleveland. I thought it happened much later, but he thought that May Day, because there were a bunch of these, trade union radicalists, and they were demonstrating for an 8-hour workday, which is pretty radical in the 1880s. So he came up with Labor Day, and there's a reason why Labor Day is in the fall, and people who celebrate Labor Day, it's a holiday when people drink too much in America and they drive and get in accidents. But that was to take away from the radicalism of May Day. And then, of course, in the Cold War period in the 50s, May Day was the May Day parades and, outside the Kremlin and so forth. And America had Labor Day, which had nothing to do with labor anymore. It's just a place when people drink. But no, you had the violent history of labor history in the United States. But labor unionization, of course, reached a high point uh, uh, during the New Deal. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and you had this very important piece of legislation, the Wagner Act, which is still in force, which says that if you get up to a certain number, when you say we're trying to organize a union, then they can't stop you. They can try different ways. But so the AFL and the CIO, they merged together, two powerful national unions, and things are going very well. And you had the war, and then in the 1950s, I mean, again, with the importance of production and so forth, the 1950s, you had economic prosperity. But also in the 1950s, you have the Cold War period and anti-communism and McCarthyism. And this is when it becomes dangerous again for people being in unions. But you're right, through the 60s and 70s, unions were still powerful, but they were losing in members, unfortunately. And here's where I think union leadership, the very top, made a mistake because what they said was, okay, we're losing members, but we have political influence. And they used it, definitely. Yeah, there are a lot of pro-labor laws that were passed. But I remember thinking as a young student, well, what happens when labor membership goes down even further? And what happens when you don't have that political influence? What do you rebuild on? And that's what's happened in America. So yeah, the next key period is Ronald Reagan, and when he becomes president, and the conservative movement and everything, and you have a strike by air traffic controllers. The people will make sure the planes land, in the right place and there's no accidents. And yeah, there was a big strike. They all went on strike, and Reagan fired them all and put in military people who were competent to run the airport. But and that was it. And I remember people were shocked by this, both on the left and right. The right was very happy, of course, but on the left, people were, you can't do that. Oh, yes, I can. And then it's gone downhill since then. So now unionization in America is 10% of the working force. And I mean, that's nothing.
Yeah.
But you have places like in Las Vegas and also teachers unions. People have started in the last 10 years, and not least because of the economic crisis of 2008, have started to reactivate themselves in new unions, and especially the service industries. And again, like in Las Vegas. So things are popping up all over the place. And then, of course, this attempt to unionize a large Amazon warehouse is part of this movement. And it failed this time, but I mean, one has to put it in context. But it's an ongoing struggle to get up from that 10% to, you know, 12%.
Yeah, but it's encouraging, like you said, that unions have sort of started making a comeback,
Right,
and
definitely.
like, as depressing as the failed vote in Alabama is, it's still, like you say, you have to put it in perspective.
Uh, mm,
Like if someone had told me 5 years ago that there's going to be like a huge union drive at an Amazon
mm.
warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, I would have said, no, there's not going to be. You're
uh,
dreaming.
yeah,
And of course, this is also why it's kind of depressing, because I was so happy to see this. It's like
yeah,
really inspiring, and
yeah,
like I alluded to it before, but like just the courage of the people organizing
exactly.
this thing is just amazing.
Yeah.
People basically like took their future in their own hands and
Yeah.
just
Well,
tried
there
to.
was this guy in California, wasn't it? It was during well, we're still in the pandemic, but early in the pandemic, wasn't a California guy working for Amazon who went public on the really bad working conditions they had there? I mean, he wasn't trying to organize a union or anything, but he was fired the next day.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean, there was
of
a lot
course.
of publicity and everything, but
Yeah.
he was not rehired.
No, and like the problem with Amazon is they're so huge, and their market share is so great that,
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically like a private monopoly
Yeah.
in many areas.
Yeah.
So like once you have a monopoly, you're not as dependent on good
Mm,
PR, because like even if you don't like Amazon, who else are you gonna
yeah.
like buy stuff from? It's uh, if you live in a small town and there's no hardware store,
Oh,
like where you're gonna get your hammer and nails,
oh,
you have to do business with them. So
yeah.
it's they're not as vulnerable to that, to people like voting with their dollars and voting with their wallets,
Exactly.
which means that the only way of influencing them in the right and humane direction is
Mm,
to organize.
yeah.
And fortunately, there are some brave souls out there who are ready
Yeah.
take great personal risks
Right.
to do this. But
Yeah.
uh, should we talk about the PRO Act,
Yeah, I
perhaps?
thought we get there. One other thing before we get there, because that's one of the
Yeah,
possible solutions to this problem. But first of all, to point out, yeah, like Alabama is one of the. In America, you have so-called right-to-work states. That started in the, maybe it started in the '60s, but it really picked up in the '80s, where each state would pass a law saying you have a right to work. No, actually, you have you have a right not you have a right to be exploited is what it meant. It meant that because there were a lot of closed shops, you had to be a member of the union, and this was the result of the whole New Deal and organizing and so forth. But more Republicans got in power. They said, "Let's have you. You don't have to be a member of a union," and then they called it a right to work because it sounded nice, but you don't have a right to work for any company. I mean, the companies will say that, but anyway, in Alabama, there's 27 states, so more than half of them have these rules, which again makes it very difficult to organize a union. But Alabama is one of the worst, one of the most conservative states. So again, I think this is also one reason why they were chosen too.
yeah,
I mean, to actually stand up and try to do this uh, 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 requires a great deal of courage. But what also I find interesting about Amazon is you say, yeah, they've captured the market. They're politically enormously important, the money they give to candidates, but also the influence, again, just like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, they were in charge. The American government wasn't doing anything at the end of the 19th century. It took the progressive movement at the beginning of the 20th century to change that. But Bezos is very smart because as you know, he was one of the few people who came out in favor of $15 minimum wage. So while Joe Manchin from poor state of West Virginia says, no, no $15 for us, uh, much to the consternation of his governor, a Republican governor, Bezos says, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm paying my workers $15 an hour. Of course, he doesn't say anything about working conditions or anything like that, but he's really smart that way. And
yeah,
also for the first time now, although he doesn't say for the first time, but in 3 years, he's actually paid federal taxes. Of course, he's gotten back billions of dollars because that's another thing. Maybe we'll get into it more with the infrastructure thing and taxation of American corporations because they don't pay taxes. That's it. But Bezos is very smart. He's playing his cards very smart. He's sort of aligning himself with Biden. You know, I'll pay my workers $15 an hour as long as you don't just keep quiet about the union thing. And he's made other pronouncements. Yeah, infrastructure is good. Yeah, more roads to to Amazon.
exactly.
But he
It's,
couldn't care less about these fundamental democratic issues. But he's very smart that way. Walmart never was good at playing that game. I don't know if it's
no,
because of the owners or what. But I'll leave that to the door. But Bezos is he's smart.
yeah,
More dangerous.
that's an important thing. It's he's really clever when it comes to like public relations. He's come out in support of higher corporate taxes and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
And
but they don't pay
like
that.
this all sounds really nice
Yeah,
until you start looking closer at it
yeah.
and realize that, yeah, like when it comes to the tax thing, for example, this is something that's going to affect Walmart. It's not going to affect Amazon because they don't
Oh,
pay those taxes anyway.
yeah,
And the same thing with the infrastructure. Like, of course, it's going to support it. Like, they're going to use this infrastructure to run their business, and like it's this all looks like super nice and
Mm.
like worker friendly and this and that. And responsible until you actually look closer at it,
Yeah.
and then you realize that Jeff Bezos cares only about Amazon's profits,
He'll keep on
basically.
adding it. And that was another thing. All these companies have made so many more billions of dollars during the pandemic as well. And yeah, there has to be some way of holding them accountable. The tax system, yeah, we can talk about that more next time as well. But it's a joke, you know, because they don't pay taxes. That was interesting distinction between Amazon and Walmart. So it almost looks like Amazon is trying to run Walmart out of business, or I mean, they're not a direct
Yeah.
competitor. Well, they sell things cheap there from China. Hmm. Oh,
No,
interesting.
in the long run, they're definitely gonna squeeze Walmart out of in the market, I think, and
So it'd be
just take
one
over.
store, Amazon. But you're right. We should talk about this pro thing. Explain what that is because that hasn't been mentioned in Sweden. I didn't know it was as important as it was. So what does pro stand for, and what is it going to do, and whose idea is it, and so forth?
Yeah, I'll run through it quickly if you'd like. It's the PRO Act stands for the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. So protecting the right to organize labor into unions.
Hmm.
And uh, considering what we've talked about, that seems kind of important, and especially in a country such as Sweden, where we have a history of caring about
Oh,
labor rights, this should probably be more well known. So
true.
anyway, this it's a bill that's it's passed Congress. It's passed Congress once before. That time it died in committee in the Senate
When was this? I
years
didn't know
ago.
that.
It's a couple of years ago, 2018, I think.
Okay.
But it's passed the House of Representatives again, and at the moment it's in committee in the Senate, and it's like quite an impressive bill, to be honest. What it's gonna do basically is it's gonna extend the liability for employers. So if you have like um, um, joint employment,
Yeah.
you have one employer who hires a contractor who employs people to do a job. The main employer is going to be made liable for working conditions and safety and stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that, and will be held responsible for rules violations and infractions, which they aren't today, which is a way major corporations can get around worker protections. Just hire
Mm.
a contractor to
Oh
do
yeah.
the job, and
Yeah.
then basically no rules apply. It's going to expand the definition of employee. Uh, and this is, when you read the text of the bill, it's fairly obvious that this is targeted at gig economy jobs
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
DoorDash and
Yeah.
Uber and stuff like
Right.
that. Uh, it's going to put like really stringent limits on who's a contractor and
Mm.
who's an employee, uh, which will make it much easier to unionize people who work for, say,
Mm.
Uber and places like that, or companies like that, I should
Yeah.
say. Um, and also, it's gonna limit who counts as a supervisor, uh, which is also it's quite a like subtle thing, but it's uh, my take on it is it's a way of like stopping corporations from reclassifying people
Okay.
as supervisors in smaller workplaces in order to one, get them to go along with company policy easier,
Right.
and to make them claim more responsibility, and also try to hold them accountable for
Right.
workplace rules violations.
Right.
Like if you make one of your employees a supervisor in the workplace,
Oh,
once rules are broken, you can like sacrifice that
it's his
employee
fault. Yeah.
because yeah, they're the
Mm.
supervisor.
Ah.
But it's going to demand that if you're a supervisor, you actually have to like supervise and lead the work,
Yeah.
and it's going to make union election rules
Right.
a bit better. It's going to permit employees to petition for smaller groups, unionize.
Mm.
It's gonna stop this thing that Amazon did,
Exactly. Yeah.
having the ballot box put into like a
Mm.
public space
Right.
at the workplace. It's going to give unions the right uh, to determine where the election is to take place, or even allow the votes to take place electronically or
Mm.
via mail, which is a
Mm.
good thing because
Mm.
like
Oh.
secret elections are
Mm.
like
Oh.
quite vital to democracy,
Yeah.
and quite a big thing. It's going to eliminate the right to work
Right.
laws
Mm.
throughout the country, which is uh, that's like one of the biggest things actually.
Right.
Uh, the thing about right to work laws is before was it like 2012 or something, unions could still force non-members to pay dues. If the union
Mm.
negotiated on your behalf, you had an obligation to pay union fees, even though you weren't a member.
Mm.
And the Supreme Court struck that down roughly one decade ago, which
Okay.
basically eliminated the whole point of being in a union. If the union has to to help you, even if you're not a member, then
Oh.
why pay your dues, basically?
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, those right to work laws are going to go, and
Right.
it's it's going to expand the right of employees to strike and engage in conflicts in the workplace.
Mm.
It's going to expressly permit intermittent strikes, which are banned today. They're not
Mm.
the National Labor Relation Board doesn't protect people who engage in like on and off strikes. So if you strike for like a short amount of time, go back to work, and then strike again
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the same purpose,
Mm.
your employer can just fire you today. But that's expressly permitted in
Mm.
this act. Um, and it's going to eliminate the possibility of hiring permanently hiring replacements for people who go on strike. So if you go on strike, uh, as matters stand today, your employer can hire temporary workers to take your space and keep them on once you return to work. And in the long run, just once it's time to lay someone off, they're
Right.
going to fire you.
Mm.
Um, and that possibility is going to be taken away. It's going to mandate arbitration from the National Labor Relations Board.
Right.
Excuse me, I have to just in cases where a union and an employer negotiate for a collective bargaining agreement. If they don't come to an agreement within 120 days, I think, an arbitration takes place, and this arbitration basically sets up the outlines of the deal for the next 2 years, the first 2 years of the deal, the contract, I should say.
Mm.
And one of the nice touches about this is the arbitration authority is going to take into account the employees' prospects at the workplace and the ability of employees to sustain themselves and their families and their dependents on their wages. And this is, I mean, it's quite a forceful thing to put in there, just like basically saying outright that, yeah, we're gonna mandate fair wages. Once you unionize, we're basically going to make sure you have a living wage, and this is going to be done via arbitration, which is mandated by law. And finally, it's gonna raise penalties and fines and stuff like that on employers who break the rules. And it's also gonna make it possible to fine individual bosses and company officers and people like that, instead of just fining the company. So if you have like a vice president of a company who breaks the law or breaks a contract, then you're not just going to fine, like, say, Amazon $100,000, which is completely pointless. It's meaningless. It's nothing to them. You're actually going to fine individual people in charge, and that's probably going to keep like middle management people in line a bit more. They won't have the company to bail them out to the same extent. So it's like quite an impressive bill, to be honest.
I mean, it's an enormously comprehensive piece of legislation, and obviously pro-labor legislation, which Republicans might be against. But I mean, it's the biggest step forward, since the Wagner Act in the 1930s, which would really redefine American workplaces. I didn't know it had started before Biden. I thought it was a Biden proposal. And as I understand it, maybe I'm wrong, but Biden is going to try to include this in the infrastructure bill, or is it going to be a standalone bill? I thought he was going to try to get it through or I'm unclear about that. Is it going to be part of the infrastructure, which will probably go through budget reconciliation, or does it have to try to get 60 votes in the Senate?
Well, it's hard to say at the moment. Like, it's just like looking at it today, where we stand today, like having to deal with Joe Manchin. I don't think this is going to pass either way, unfortunately, because like if they try to include it in the infrastructure bill, as I told you before we started recording, my cynical take is do that, it's just to have a sacrificial lamb for Joe Manchin, so they can take it out and say that, yeah, Manchin made us take it out, and get him to vote for the infrastructure. Just give him like a victory to make him vote for the rest of it. But also just like getting 60 votes in support of this, it's not going to happen. There's no way Republicans are going to vote for this. And there's no way Joe Manchin is going to vote for this either, or Kirsten Sinema. So it's I mean, it's hard to see this passing in its current form, unfortunately. But at the same time, it's too early to say. Definitely, because like it's still in committee. we
Yeah.
don't even know what's going to be what's going to be in
No, and
the
the
final bill.
same situation with
What's
the Voting
whatever.
Rights Act that we sort of forgotten about it in the committee stage and hearings and so forth. So we'll see what happens. But obviously, I mean, it's a very important act, and maybe sometime in the future when there is no filibuster or where there's 60 Democratic senators. I don't know. Trying to end on a positive note, but it's certainly it's a piece of legislation people should be aware of, and if it were fully implemented, it would totally redefine relationships between capital and labor in the United States, which is
Yeah.
pretty dramatic, and still keep a capitalist system. But uh, maybe that's about all one can say about it today. Uh,
Yeah,
any final thoughts?
absolutely. Like this and the voting rights bill,
Mm,
uh, those two together,
oh,
like we talked about this before we started recording,
mm,
those two together would be like the biggest
yeah.
thing to happen to American workers and American voters since, yeah, basically since the 1960s,
Oh,
since the Civil Rights
true.
Bill,
Right.
the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
Um, this we our original plan for today was to discuss the infrastructure proposal, but
Yeah.
I compared to this and the voting rights thing. The
Exactly.
infrastructure proposal is peanuts, basically.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that makes me hopeful is Joe Biden has the one thing he's been consistently good on throughout his entire career in politics is labor issues.
Oh,
And and
good point.
if he's serious about like building a legacy,
Mm.
there's no better way to do it than this,
Oh,
because if he passes this and the voting rights bill, then he's basically a historic figure.
yeah.
Uh, that's all it's going to take.
Yeah.
The infrastructure bill is not going to do it.
No. Oh.
This will. So,
Yeah, so who thought one would be talking about Biden as a historically important person of a year ago? But yeah, no, you're definitely right. So yeah, maybe we can end our discussion for today because we'll be coming back to this and especially how it influences Biden's legacy. And we'll see what we focus on next time. But yeah, we were going to talk about infrastructure, but then this very dramatic event happened, and though we had a chance to talk about this important piece of legislation, which may or may not be in the Biden proposal for infrastructure. But we'll see. We'll come back to one of these things next week. Maybe infrastructure, maybe voting rights, or well, or both. Can deal with several things at the same time and just see what's going on and whether Joe Manchin is going to exact his pound of flesh. I just can't believe him. Anyway,
yeah,
if he's going to hold
someone
the government,
someone
sorry.
someone needs to just strong arm Joe Manchin into giving up the filibuster.
Uh,
Like
he's not up for
it's
re-election until 24, unfortunately.
yeah,
I
well,
hope somebody primaries him, but I mean, it's no, no. no.
Biden should,
We'll come back to the filibuster, but I actually have happened
yeah,
to read Alexander Hamilton's take on the filibuster or on so-called minority rights. Totally against it. And
yeah,
basically, so people should read the Federalist Papers again. He says, in a democracy, it's the majority that decides, and this whole minority stuff, voting a majority, you could read it today as if what is actually going on. So those people who say we're defending the Constitution and all that, I mean, uh, A, read it, and then B, read the documents that form the Constitution. Um, anyway, yeah, it's been very interesting talking about this, and I hope we've given a good overview of the labor situation in the United States and why this most recent drive to unionize was important. And I'm sure it'll be a topic we will be coming back to in the future. So
absolutely.
thank you, Anders, and
Thank you.
thank people who are watching. And I will press the stop record button and we will stop recording. Bye for now.